and welcome to Rasa Chats, I'm trying to remember our tagline, the biweekly Conversational AI podcast, I think is what our tagline is. That may or may not be it. But I am joined today with a very special guest, Julian Gerhard, who is a Rasa superhero. You may have run into him in the forums, being extremely helpful. You may have seen some of his contributions to our repo, or you may have seen some of his many, many talks about various things, and often voice technology, which I know is something that a lot of folks are particularly interested, and sort of a voice component to chatbots. So that's my introduction. But would you like to introduce yourself and let folks know what you think is important to know?
Of course. Thanks for having me. As you already mentioned, my name is Julian. I'm currently located in Weinheim, that's near Frankfurt in Germany. And I used to be the technical lead at the company Susie and James since I think 5 years now, almost this year. And mainly my work consists of dealing with conversational AI related topics and of course developing software in the end. And in my spare time, actually I do the same. So I'm pretty excited that I can take part in the podcast, and I'm looking forward to the next hour.
Yeah, I'm delighted to have you. And before we started recording, you were starting to tell me the story of how the company got its name, and I would love to hear the end of that story, and also probably the beginning again for the audience.
Okay, of course I can do that. The story actually originates from the founding days of the company, where Dr. Jonas Mosler, our CEO, thought about how to simplify the human-machine communication. And he always imagined that there are two, let's say, characters, two individuals, one called Susie, containing all the logic, the AI-related stuff, and James basically meant to be the kind of data assistant and holding all the knowledge and information stuff. And so he was so fascinated about these two individuals that he simply decided to name the company Susie and James. That's basically it.
Interesting. Yeah, and I think that... So
usually the thing is that most of our collaboration partners or project partners are wondering why a AI tech company is named Susie and James without any hint about technology or anything AI related in its name. Because in the last years we observed that many companies contain something like AI in their name or something techy. So that's why people are always wondering about the name.
Yeah, that does make sense. And also I don't know if any of y'all have been to the website, but it is not like the machine learning blue that all machine learning websites are.
No.
But I think that brings up a really interesting sort of aspect of conversational AI, which is that it is conversational, right? And usually conversations have at least two people in it, or I should say conversational partners, because they're not necessarily people, right? In the case of a virtual assistant. And at Rasa, we have Sarah, who is our virtual assistant, who's currently available in the GitHub repo and not, I think, online right now, but that is to be updated. Keep an eye on that space. Yeah, and I was wondering if you want to talk a little bit about your experience with sort of the personification of conversational agents and how that affects, the design and building them, and how that plays into your work.
Yeah, very good question. I think this is a very important point, and in the preparation of this podcast, I read one of your suggestions, what I see in the future of conversational AI, and this is definitely a part of it, because I believe that we currently still don't really understand the needs of people, and one way to address it is to think more in the direction of character building and understanding personal needs. And I think individualization is a very important step into that direction, because I think a human wants to be treated like human, and to be able to do so, an AI, of course, needs to identify itself as such. But I think addressing individual needs, like, for example, prioritizing a desire or prioritizing something about, let's say, a sanity issue or something like that, is very, very important. But I think it's also a very, very difficult part, because, designing individual aspects of an AI is, I think, needs to be the second step. And the first step is still not really finished, meaning that the conversation-driven design you are currently proposing to everyone is I think, the first step to deal with data and having proper conversations that really addresses personal needs, and not something like rule-based behavior around the problem of the lack of understanding or deep understanding of what the user wants to have or wants to know. I don't know if that answers directly your questions, also.
No, I think it does. And I think there's, it's interesting because I think that certainly in NLP right now, a lot of the focus is on sort of, how do we make language models bigger? How do we improve, certain metrics? But looking over, sort of like peeking over the fence at the robotics literature and research, there's been a lot of work on this sort of, how do you design a robotic experience that's like good for the human, and pulling in things from like animation and making the agents themselves particularly appealing or particularly well suited to the task that they're doing on like, I don't even know, character design almost. And I think that is part of that. How do you help someone with their particular need case and make them feel, seen, and not tricking them that they're interacting with a person, but how do you make the experience, increasingly useful and enjoyable? And it's hard.
That's a good point. I think, and for me, the most important step into that direction would be proper analyzation of what actually happened during conversations. That's, I think, something you, you actually proposed with, for example, Rasa X, the whole CDD concept. And it's something I experience most of the days of the last, let's say, 2 years, that properly analyzing conversations is the key to everything that should happen afterwards. I think to really generate value, and I think we agree on what value means in this case, you need to understand the user's needs, and to be able to do that, you need to properly analyze what they actually said. This can be very time consuming, at least for us it is, because the diversity of conversations is almost, it's incredible. And I think we believe we know how a person will express themselves on a subject, but I think that's, from time to time, that's simply a mistake. So, I think this is very, very important. And something like individualization can happen afterwards, because as soon as I think the first thing a user wants to experience is his subject his subject gets properly addressed. Because I need help, I want to know something, I want to execute a certain task like booking a flight. We all know those kind of examples roaming around the internet. And as soon as I experience that this actually works, then the next step will be that, I think the AI starts to express itself in a proper way, meaning that it not only fulfills his task, but to address my personal needs, for example. But I think that's the second step. The Susie and James, are already, or we are still at step one, getting an understanding of our user base.
Yeah, and it's hard. And you mentioned sort of the amount of time that it takes to look at data and how surprising it always is. And that's absolutely my experience. People will surprise you every time. You're like, okay, there's only one possible way to do this. And people will try lots of different ways.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we've sort of talked a little bit about sort of Rasa and what makes us a little bit different in the space. And I know that you talked about in your superhero interview sort of why you came to Rasa in the first place. But I'd be interested in hearing, I think we sort of touched on this a little bit, what is it that makes you want to keep using Rasa? There's no shortage of conversational AI frameworks out there. What is it that makes Rasa good for your work?
Yeah, actually, I already mentioned how what drew me to Rasa, but a good question, what keeps me there? So basically, there are several problems that need to be solved handling a conversation. Let's keep it on this level. The dialogue management, the NLU, the NLP, whatever you want to call it, and some kind of knowledge-based background stuff. And I observed from framework to framework, things are handled differently, but in the end, all of those three problems need to be solved to actually have successful conversations. And I think the opportunity to modify the software base on our needs is a very important aspect here, because as conversations are diverse, so are situations that needs to be solved. And I think Rasa makes it very, very easy to modify or adapt or extend or whatever you actually want to do. Having a core that gets updated from the Rasa team almost every week, keeping up to date with the latest technologies, suggestions on how to handle certain situations, things like that, and not at least the community, where we are able to dive deeper into ideas or solving problems that others might have solved, and all of that together. I think there's no necessity to change, because let's, for example, say Rasa, we want to change from Rasa to, or switch from Rasa to something like Lewis. What is it that Lewis can do better? I think currently nothing, to be honest, and there's no need to change. And I think the whole infrastructure of the Rasa open source framework is very, very sophisticated and understandable at the same time. And that's actually what I want to, or what I want our developers to use. So yeah, actually that's it.
I'm glad to hear that. And I would say the community around Rasa is fabulous. I feel very fortunate to get to work with y'all every day. Well, not every day. Usually not on weekends. And you touched also on open source there. I don't know why I'm saying that a lot in this conversation, but I am. That's my thing. I'm repeating a lot this time. On open source and the flexibility. And I don't know, it's something I think a lot about, because it's a little bit of a double-edged sword, right? On the one hand, yes, you can do what you need to do with Rasa, hopefully. On the other hand, because it is a little bit more flexible, right, the answer to can I do this is sometimes like, yes, but it's going to take a little bit of work. So I'm wondering if you would have any tips or pointers for people who are, maybe they have their assistant, they're up and running, they're starting CDD, and they're like, oh, I need actually something like a little bit different. Maybe I need to, possibly modify something, or I want to make a pull request to Rasa open source. What would your tips be for somebody in that situation?
Yeah, that's actually a very good question, because it's happens daily. I think I can try to explain what I would do or start with. The first thing I would wonder is it really necessary to modify the existing core? Because most of the times the answer will be no. And that's, I think, one of the coolest assets of Rasa, that most of the time, your situation could be handled differently, but changing the core or the code of the core. Most of the times, you simply have to be your mind has to be flexible, because in the end, you have a situation, you have a problem you want to solve. That actually happens very often to me. In the context of having form actions, and how setting of slots have an impact on a conversation, on the long term or on the short term. However, most of the times I'm discussing with my developers that simply overriding or modifying existing code actually might solve the problem, but as soon as the next update is released, this might get you into trouble. So I think one of the coolest assets of Rasa is that you have very good suggestions for handling different situations. And if my own situation that I'm not able to solve, or that I want to solve, is not addressed there, it might be the case that it can be solved otherwise. And that's something I really recommend, to say, okay, I'm going to think about it twice, instead of simply changing, for example, the ask for the next slot function, because I think I have a better idea. I think most of the times it's a very good idea to try to follow the recommendations from the Rasa team, because it's actually their asset, their software. And then I think the next good idea is starting to do a little bit of research, because if you have the problem, most of the times at least one other person had the same problem, and most of the times hundreds of people had the same problem. So most of the times there's no necessity of solving the problem on your own, rather than to take a look on the forum, on writing people directly, or discuss things. And if then there's no other way, you can start to actually modify by your needs. So this is really something I recommend, because in the past I tend to be the kind of person that simply starts to change everything to align it with my needs. And during the years, I my experience grew, and I'm now thinking that, thinking about problems twice or even a third time often means that I don't need to put that much effort in things, because other people solved my problem already for me. So this is more a kind of tip I really want to give.
Yeah, I think that is a really excellent tip. And I think we've all been there, where you have like, okay, this is the implementation I'm going to do. And you work on it, and you work on it, and you work on it. And you're like, it's not working. And the simplest answer, even though it's maybe not like the least work right now, but like for long time longevity and like what you're going to have to maintain in the future, is to step back and do another implementation. Yeah, which is, I don't know, sometimes not the most satisfying answer, but you know, a month from now, may be the one that makes you much happier when you don't have to deal with, refactoring.
I think a really good example, or kind of example for your question, is during the latest or the last two updates of Rasa open source. You describe the new distribution of confidence scores between 0 and 1, and you explain that now they are kind of there's a proper distribution. And I thought a couple of hours about this changes and why you recommend to try this certain configuration. And I think if you think about it, it's very obvious, because you are then, if you go this way, forced to say, if the balance of my confidence scores or what my AI is actually doing is not what I expect it to do or what I want it to do, then one of the reactions that I've seen the most was to say, oh, then my config is bad. I need to tune my config. I need to modify my config.
Yep.
And I think that's the same kind of situation that leads you to modify the core code. Not the configuration is the problem. The data most likely is the problem. And what you should do actually is, if your AI doesn't do what you expect it to do, then you need to find the answer in your data, either in the NLU data or the stories or rules, and not handle the problem or boost confidence scores by manipulating the config. And that's, I think, that's why I really recommend to read the suggestions in the documentation, in the forum, in whatever knowledge base you have, and think about it before modifying something that is meant to be as it is.
Yeah, we do try really hard to be helpful and to build tools that are...
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, and I definitely feel that urge to tune the machine learning rather than change the data. And I think a lot of that has to do with sort of a little bit of the mystique of the field, right? Oh, you work in machine learning. You're working with algorithms all day. You never have to touch, that data. Machine learning means you don't have to touch data at all ever, which is very much not the case day to day. Something like, I don't know.
Of course, it's the configuration is very important.
Yes, of course.
That's absolutely crucial. And knowing what to do is absolutely recommended. And I think a very good point is to start with, if you face such a problem, okay, then create 10 different configurations, execute a test run, and take a look at the results. But the good old garbage in, garbage out rule is still very, very present these days. And this is that's the kind of tip I really have, that sometimes things are very good how they are, and the problem might be solved not by simply manipulating all the stuff that's there. So yeah, of course, if that's the last thing, then you can go this way. I've done that many times, especially while deploying the system on the Raspberry. There are really, really hard problems to solve, and I needed to change parts of the core code. But yeah, that's the last thing I try, to be honest.
Data first. Yeah. And I would say at least in the last couple months, the thing that has come up most often for me, for people when they have problems with NLU in particular, is storing pieces of information as intents, right? Like having an intent to book a train, book a plane, book a taxi, rather than using slots. And as a result, you just have a lot more classes, and they overlap a lot.
Yeah. Absolutely.
But I do want to pick up on something that you mentioned, which is the Raspberry Pi. So you've worked quite a bit on embedded systems, and I know that it's something that I get questions about, and I'm like, I don't know, ask somebody else. And I was wondering, so you have some talks, some of which are on the Rasa YouTube, so I don't want you to necessarily like rehash the complete talk, but if someone is interested in taking a Rasa assistant and let's say trying to host it on device or add voice in a more local way, what would you recommend to them, just in general?
I'd recommend to just don't do it. No, just kidding. To be honest, I've my experience with embedded devices, don't cover every existing IoT device or things like that. When I started to started to implement certain projects, the first steps contained a very simple start, and I knew the Raspberry very well because it's a good all-rounder, nothing too special. I thought about using a Jetson Nano, but I think that is kind of an overkill depending on what you want to do. And I think deploying Rasa on an IoT device isn't that much different from deploying it anywhere, but you need to respect, or you need to deal with lots of compatibility issues regarding, for example, the kernel or the OS or whatever you might need to face there. I think, or a good advice is always try to virtualize. If it's possible to use something like Docker, use Docker. Absolutely. It doesn't make sense to deploy natively if there's no necessity to do so. And regarding the Raspberry, I think, being motivated is very good, is necessary, because it really took me, actually what happens is you see, okay, Python is installed, let's start. And the problems start with your, with maybe the first pip installation part, because some kind of external dependency can't be compiled or can't be installed because there's no wheel for Debian or whatever. So I think we don't have the time to go into detail here, but if you really want to be successful, and I think you need to be very robust against such problems. Just keep your eye on the goal and continue working on it. I think I needed at least 4 to 5 weeks to actually having everything stable on the Raspberry. It was a Model 3, I think. So not even the last version with lots of memory. I think that's the key, because most of the times there is a way, but it can be very frustrating, and at least it was for me, because you're running from problem into problem. You think, okay, now I successfully installed TensorFlow or PyTorch, and then the next problem is just present afterwards. So I think motivation and some kind of I continue until it runs attitude is very recommended.
Give yourself a very generous deadline.
Yeah. As I think you mentioned the smart speaker Raspberry Pi. This was clearly a self-test for me. Do I manage to build a visually appealing, functional smart speaker that is configurable on top? That's simply something I wanted to know if I can do. And surprisingly, things like connecting a very good microphone and having a weight word detection like, hey, Susie, hey, James, whatever, wasn't the real problem. The real problem was actually installing dependencies, having a proper infrastructure, and all the normally hard things like having speech recognition offline was actually pretty easy compared to having everything set up. I think there's a forum post, a very, very long one, in which I discussed with certain active forum members how to handle things. And that's, that speaks for itself, to be honest. Yeah.
So I'm taking away that your main piece of advice for people who are interested in embedded systems is be patient and be prepared for the installation to take a really long time.
Yeah, of course, I think things are developed further from week to week. So I think the Raspberry company announced a new model with a machine learning chip on it, and I think those dependency problems might be solved releasing this new device in the future. And what I mean with this is in 2019 it was very hard to do so, but that doesn't mean that someone has to be afraid of trying it now, because of course there were people that have gone this way, that are gone this way, and have solved certain kinds of problems, and now things might be much easier than they were for me. So the most important advice I'd like to give is do it, and that's the essence of everything. You just need to start doing it, and most of the problems actually can be solved. But not doing it is the biggest problem.
Yeah, it will definitely not help you get to your end goal if you just don't start. So that was a voice project, and you've worked quite a bit on voice. And it's interesting because I've worked on voice in ASR, but not specifically with conversational AI. Since I've come to Rasa, I've really been focusing on text. So just sort of opening that box. Woohoo! Oh, it's in here. It's talking about voice and conversational AI. So someone who was interested, let's say you had an assistant that was working really well with text, and they're like, okay, I want to add a voice version as well. What would you think about in that situation?
Yeah, I think that's something that's understanding the problems that arise switching from a textual-based assistant to a voice-based assistant is actually work in progress for most everyone. So one should not be afraid of facing those problems. There's a reason why systems like Alexa actually can handle only very easy real conversations these days, because there are problems and all of us are facing those. For example, a very common case is we used to deploy phone bots that actually automizes or hopefully optimize certain workflows for example, first level support or customer support, things like that. I think you are familiar with those. Switching from having a simple chatbot to a voice bot, meaning that you need to deal with spoken language, and German is a very difficult language in terms of speaking it, and a very common problem is handling domain-specific language. if we imagine a certain customer case in which you want to schedule an appointment, and the voice AI wants to know for which kind of appointment you want to schedule. And now things one want or would want to utter depend from domain to domain. If I want to schedule an appointment for, let's take a dentist, then what's the correct answer? It's absolutely domain specific. And most of, for example, the speech recognizers we use are trained on more public domain data sets and struggle with a proper transcription of domain specific data. Of course, there are ways to improve the performance on them, but having a domain specific vocabulary isn't that easy. I think you started collecting these kind of data on GitHub. I saw, but having it in various languages is very time consuming, and there are quality aspects to respect. And the thing is that you have in compared with textual assistance, the performance problem, the latency problem, because if you call and a voice bot takes over, then you don't want to, wait, for example, 10 seconds for an answer. You expect an immediate answer. And these kind of problems are very common using spoken language. And I'd lie if I'd say that we solved them all. Actually, we are dealing with it from day to day. And so the domain-specific case and the latency or performance problem are very, very difficult. And then the next thing is detecting the language itself. Sometimes we have native speaking users, then we have users that switch language. All those kind of phenomenons that you have in the area of chatbots, you absolutely have in the area of voice bots as well. And most of the times they are even harder to solve because you need to have a proper transcription. And even if you have this transcription, you need to deal with the problem afterwards. So I think an advice I'd give is that you need to be aware of the extra amount of effort you actually need to put in handling voice. That's really a huge amount of effort that comes in addition. And that's what I'd recommend, to do proper research, and that you need to be aware of the extra amount of problems that you need to solve.
Yeah.
Does that answer your question?
It does. Yeah, no, and it's gotten me thinking as well. Particularly when you mentioned when people were switching languages and using multiple languages. Certainly, traditionally, ASR models are language specific, and they include specific mappings between wave input. Ooh, excuse me. Sorry, I hit my mic. Hopefully that wasn't too loud. And they include certain, learned mappings between certain, MFCCs or whatever you're using to extract features from the signal to, potential hypotheses about what somebody's saying. And those tend to be very language specific. And I'm familiar with work on code switching, so using multiple languages together, even in the same sentence with text. And I'm sure someone's working on it in voice, but I haven't run across it. And it seems harder because with text, right, the language has already been filtered through a human writing down something like what they intend. So you have, you might have a hint because based on the writing system they're using, for example, if someone's switching writing systems, probably they're using different languages, and you might have hints based on other things. But with the voice signal, that's hard.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd like to add that it's nothing we actually recommend to do. This is, for example, take the phone bots. A very easy solution would be to simply ask the user in which language you want to proceed. That's a very convenient solution for a otherwise ultra hard problem to solve, because assume the user starts to try talking German, and then he recognizes that it's too hard for him, and then he started to talk French. Detecting the switch from German to French only on the voice line is actually something that needs to be avoided, because there's trouble ahead. And it's actually something we don't recommend. We usually, I think it might be possible with the right recognition model to at least detect the currently spoken language and then switch afterwards to a better pipeline that actually is fine-tuned to this language, but handling it dynamically during the whole conversation, enabling you to switch from language to language. I think that there would be an additional amount of hardware and data and things like that. I won't recommend that scenario, but it's actually very cool for some kind of experiments, but nothing more.
Yeah, it seems expensive to do and difficult. Very, very difficult.
Actually, it's happening. We observe, I think our systems are used by, we have some weeks with many thousand calls. And from time to time, we start to analyze those calls. And I think from 100 calls, at least 15 up to 20 contain various languages. So actually, it seems to be some kind of problem. But as I mentioned at the beginning of our conversation, providing a multilingual recognition pipeline doesn't seem to be the best way to approach the problem.
Yeah, and it's tough because, like you mentioned, it's something that people do, and it's a way that people use language, and it's very, it's a very natural thing to do in face-to-face interaction. And like, if I also spoke German, and also I thought that our podcast audience would be comfortable in both German and English, we might even be switching back and forth. I don't speak German, just to make that clear. So it's very much like a thing that humans do, but given that we treat, different languages as different entities, and that assumption is so deeply baked into our, NLP ethos, it would be hard to go back and, rebuild everything in NLP, particularly because it's sex-based. I think the fact that it's sex-based plays into that a lot, from the standpoint of, okay, we are always going to target multilingual settings. We understand that this is something that happens. It's something that we care about, and we're going to handle it all the time in everything that we do. And I think that would be a major sea change in the field for sure.
Yeah.
Anyway, sorry, just things that I have been thinking about. So I don't want to keep you too long, but I am at the end of every episode. Sorry, I should have had one more coffee. At the end of every episode, and I'm really thinking about multilingual language use now. I try to make sure everybody gets a chance to, plug something. Is there something you want to, tell the Rasa community? Do you have, something coming up that you want to let them know about? I don't know, is your company hiring? Anything you want to bring up?
Okay, thanks for giving me that opportunity. Okay, first things first. Of course, we are hiring. Unfortunately, for most of this audience, we are currently only looking for on-site employees. different reasons for that. But I think we might start to hire remote in the near future, and I think I can keep you updated on that.
Yeah.
But if you're interested in what we do, simply talk to me. Most of the times there's a solution if you are really interested. The second thing is something very important for me. In the preparation, you also mentioned if I have some recommendations
Yes.
for folks interested in contributing. And I'd like to pick up this, this thing, use the moment to do exactly that, because I think, of course, there are very, very, very good software engineers at Rasa that absolutely know how to do things. But I strongly believe in community behavior, and that even the grown Rasa team wouldn't be able to solve everything that might be in the backlog in GitHub without the community. And I observed that there are most of the people I talk to, if they wouldn't be interested in contributing actually to Rasa, seem to be a bit afraid of doing so. And I wonder if they are, because I think there's no need to. That's something I would like to recommend. Don't be afraid of contributing, because you might to test your software, and you might to start a discussion about what you want to contribute, and if it really generates value, and if it's done in the right way. I remember my own discussion with Daksh, who really commented every piece of my code contributions. And I loved it, because that's actually how proper software development should be. I think if you have a really good idea, and you think it generates value, and you want to contribute, and then don't be afraid of starting to do so, because if it's not the best idea, then people will tell you. There's no problem in that. The problem is if you don't do it. And I'm not sure why people are afraid of doing so. Maybe because they think their idea isn't good enough, or they can't handle it, or they haven't tested anything yet. I think those are kind of problems that can be solved. And I think contributing always creates a learning curve. You will get related to proper testing, learning new procedures, reading other people's code. And I really encourage everyone to do so, to participate, because based on this community work, the framework really is very advanced now. And I think you are given something, and it would be a cool idea to give something back. That's a very important point for me, and I highly want to encourage people to follow this track.
Yeah, we are. I think those are fantastic advice, Julian. Thank you very much for bringing that up. And we're always happy to see new contributors, and we're delighted for any help. And if it's something that we can't merge right now, or there's something that we would prefer that you change, we'll let you know, right? And also, if you were looking for specific things that that we need, on our GitHub, there's a project board that has issues that are open. They were like, hey, this would be great for your first contribution. So if you're looking for something that's bite-sized, and it's something that we need right now, I would encourage you to check that out. And we're happy to have you. Whatever your ability to commit time, we're just delighted.
Absolutely. Yeah, basically that's it. There would be lots more, but maybe in another meeting. So I really enjoyed participating, and I hope you could follow my answers.
Very much.
If it's late here in Germany, so
it's early in Seattle. But yeah, thank you so much for joining me today. I think this was a great conversation. And if anyone is interested in learning more about Susie and James, the company that we've mentioned, it is SUSI and JAMES. So Susie and James.
Exactly.
All right. Thanks so much for joining me today, Julian. Podcast listeners, stick around. We're going to do our new contributor shout outs. So folks that did, take up the challenge and did a new contribution. And we will do those in just a second. Thank you, Julian.
You're welcome. Thanks.
Thanks for tuning into Rasa Chats. And at this point, we'd like to give a big shout out to all of our new contributors. As always, if one of these is your names and I mispronounce it, please feel free to reach out to me, tell me how to pronounce it, and I will correct it next time. Without further ado, big shout out to our newest Rasa contributors. Welcome to the community. Joao Silandia, Sharuk, Akib Shabab, Anma, Emmanuel Metzenthen, Willem Broekema, Malamasnan, Jackson Jipang Chang, Staba Surua, Himotusa Wolodsko, Kai Harris, Rohit Gumare, Max Jalil, and Chris Rame. Thank you so much for contributing to Rasa. We're so happy to have you. Again, please reach out to me if I said your name wrong. And welcome to the team. We'll see you all 2 weeks from now for the next edition of Rasa Chats. Talk to you then.